A little over 100 years ago, just over there in those mountains, they tried to kill my grandfather's family. He escaped, but they killed his sister, his parents, and so many others. 75 years later, the massacres followed us. They came to my town. I escaped, but so many died. And even today, if I went down this road just 20 miles, they will kill me. And it's not just me, it happens everywhere. Oh, sure, they denied. They always denied, but we know it happened. We see the bodies. And why do they kill us? Just because we're not one of them. We're different. This has to stop. Genocide everywhere has to stop.
How many people are dying in Darfur? None.
Estados inocentes.
All of lies and none of truth.
There were no mass graves and there was no evidence. So many people died.
My name is George Pelavanian, and I'm a musician. I'm not a president, I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a genocide scholar. I'm just an artist. But what I do know is that genocide is the most horrible crime, and it has to stop.
Whenever there's a genocide, is it really a conflict between different races, between different religions, or is it a conflict that is about access to resources or a geostrategic positioning by different states? The answer is both.
As a translator for the FBI, I received the special clearance to get you access to the highest level classified documents, recording, wiretaps, etc. I have received more gag orders than any other person in the history of this country. When you deny the existence of genocide, then you can have the correlation between denial and continuation of genocide.
I saw my first genocide in Cambodia in 1980. I've studied genocide for 35 years. My name is Dr. Gregory Stanton. I'm the president of Genocide Watch. What I have realized is that every genocide ends with the same thing, and that is denial. And it may continue for 100 years or more afterwards. The effect of denial is genocide is continuing, and we've seen it again and again. Every day in the world, somewhere, dozens of people are being killed by genocide, and maybe far more than that. The Genocide in Darfur is a good example of what denial results in. The Sudanese Air Force is bombing villages all over Darfur, killing people by the thousands. And the Janjaweed, who were the so-called devils on horseback, go into villages after they've been destroyed by the bombers and then murder all the men and raped all the women. The reason why the genocide is occurring is that the government in Khartoum is dominated by northern Sudanese Arabs who are intent upon driving out black Africans from Sudan and replacing them with Arabs. The International Criminal Court indicted the president of the Sudanese government, Omar al-Bashir, for genocide and war crimes. Well, was he ever arrested? Not on your life. Bashir remains in power. He's still walking around, and the genocide began in 2003. It's still going on today. 500,000 have been killed. In fact, the Sudanese government is still saying there is no genocide.
If you go to UN report, see how many people are dying in Darfur? None. You may spend a week or two, none has died.
Deny the facts, deny the statistics.
How can it be a genocide?
That's why the genocide is continuing.
It's gone on for 13 years. The other genocide that is that long is the Armenian genocide.
I think anybody you talk to that has Armenian heritage will have a story close to my story. We had a large family in one of the villages east of Turkey, and Ottoman soldiers came to kill all the Armenians. We lost all members of our family on my grandmother's side. She was the only survivor.
I never met my grandpa, and I always asked my mom about grandpa because I noticed that mom would very often be sad, and she would say, well, Turks came to kill all Armenians, and they said we didn't do it, but they did. They did.
The Turkish government has continued to deny genocide for over 100 years.
Երկրին խաղաղություն, ժողովրդին սաղջանություն եւ ոգուն սրբը ամեն։ Իմ անունը Եբրաքսակ Եվոշկյանա, ձեր ծառա։ Աջան, գտամ ապրում ենք, ուզում, խմում, բարում ենք, թանում ենք, մեր հիմար ամեն հարմարությունը կար գյուղը։ Մինչև եղա 8 տարեկան։ 8 տարեկան։ Սաղ թուրքը գերին, սպաննելա։ Ռոզակում են, հրացաններով, բաներով, սրերով, թրով, հրացանով կծում են ու էկտում են։ Երեխեքը չագլի, ադելի չագլների մեծը, կծում պաղում են, սաղ լալում, խշում են, անդրներն են տրնում են, որ ձերները չիմանային ասության։
It is out of the question for there to be a stain, a shadow called genocide on Turkey.
Türkiye aksır cemana geygan. Aksır das nehing tiv. Das nehing tivi. Yegan, Zierov. Zierov, Yegan. Palet neyle zerkeni. Xështignerov, shatë xështignerov gjëgum e poro. Por deshtëma vë pakna ma bidi pakni. Amor.
It is not a question of us, Turkey, accepting the events in 1915. This was not an issue of genocide at all.
Suda, Sudpan nesem kırna kola, isteseden benden korktum, avcıdan. İşte kapadım. Eskandelor diyor, nihara, eskandelorma, aç gelsin, lalo timaj gerek korktum.
Turkey has gone around the world aggressively lobbying diplomatically to make sure there are no references to the Armenian genocide, including even major powers such as the United States.
How is the killing of 1.5 million Armenians in Turkey not genocide? Is Turkey influencing you to not answer the question?
All right, where are we at? Right here. Thank you, guys. Have a good day.
How is 1.5 million deaths not a genocide? Is the Turkish lobby not allowing you to answer this question? This is an important question because Christian Armenians are being killed and persecuted to this day.
The justification, the excuse the United States government has been using, we are doing this for sensitive diplomatic relations. This is the hypocrisy that I've been witnessing, especially with some inside knowledge of what takes place in the United States.
It started with trying to do the right thing and report criminal activities, fraud and abuse, and basic retaliations for that.
That was when Hastert was Speaker of the House. Our Congress was about to go to a vote in the House to have a resolution that declared the Armenian genocide to be genocide. But by the time it gets to the final stage, Hastert killed it.
It was a move that came with a price. He had received bribery cash to block this vote. He also took bribery in forms of sexual favors. During his junket trips to Turkey, in a particular hotel that he would stay, sexual favors were being delivered to him, underage male, also in his townhouse. So it was bribery, foreign bribery, which constitutes treason, but that was a very small portion of what FBI had already gathered. In Chicago, he also was directly involved with the notorious Turkish network that handles very large percentage of heroin-related activities, operation sales in the United States, including receiving cash in suitcases from these particular people. And he and his chief of staff, their residences were being monitored. They were bugged, not only for audio, but also for video. The FBI had in its possession, starting from 1997, slam dunk evidence in their hands, criminally implicating Dennis Hastert. The State Department knows. Many people in Congress whom I testified to, they know. And I said, you watch, there will be no accountability, and making a mockery of the entire system. And Dennis Hastert was not the only one either. The man who was the designated Speaker of the House, the congressman before him, Bob Livingston, he was the person who also was carrying out these types of criminal activities, from foreign bribery, not only governmental, but also by criminal organizations, to activities in money laundering and drug-related operations.
Turkey militarily is the second largest country in NATO, after only the United States itself. It is able to extort all sorts of concessions from Europe and the United States, and it's done exactly that in relation to the Armenian Genocide.
Hello, I'm former Congressman Bob Livingston, and for the last 7.5 years I was privileged and honored to represent the Republic of Turkey. Nobody really knows in this day and age, unless you're an historian, what happened in those days 90 to 100 years ago.
Well, that's a problem, because if there's denial for a genocide, then other people will say, well, if that happened to the Armenians, then we can maybe just get away with it too.
The lack of accountability for the Armenian Genocide in the interwar years between World War I and World War II directly contributed to the acceptance within Germany of carrying out the Holocaust against the Jewish people.
Müssen wir selbst Musterung halten und abstoßen, was sich als schlecht erwiesen hat. Und deshalb...
According to historical accounts, Hitler met with some of his generals to discuss the upcoming invasion of Poland, and someone raised the problem whether this wasn't a violation of international law. Hitler simply said, whoever remembers the Armenians? In other words, Hitler had studied what the Turks had done to the Armenians.
I compare the language that was used in the Holocaust and the language used by the Ottoman Turks who destroyed the Armenians. It's exactly the same.
It's a matter of historical record. The Turks and the Germans were in alliance in World War I, and a number of instrumental figures in the Nazi Party saw the Armenian Genocide, and more importantly, saw and discussed the failure of the rest of the world to hold anyone to account.
So Hitler was encouraged because he realized that you can get away with murder, literally. And nothing will happen to you. Nobody will come and punish you for it. He said, who after all remembers the Armenian Genocide? The answer is, a lot of those close to Hitler in the Nazi Party remembered well. One of them, Rudolf Haas, had joined the German forces in Turkey as a teenager and went on to be the commandant of Auschwitz. Think about that. The commander of Auschwitz was there when the Turks were killing and deporting the Armenians.
Those discussions, there's recorded correspondence within Germany saying nothing happened to the Turks or the Armenian Genocide, so we don't need to worry about what happens. The Turks clearly feel that they would be undermined by recognizing the reality of the Armenian genocide. Why is this of such intense interest to Turkey? Because it's perceived to be something that would reduce Turkish power within Turkey and outside Turkey.
So the defense that Turkey puts up is there should be more and more study.
Let's leave it to historians. Our archives are fully open.
A lot of the denial is done by academics and so-called historians funded by Turkey. The Turks are willing to spend millions to get the denial position out into an academically respectable form.
In the Armenian issue, most people think the Turks were guilty of genocide. If the true history comes out, people will change their minds.
Justin McCarthy's arguments just don't hold water. They just are themselves acts of denial.
My problem with historians who take the Turkish position, like Justin McCarthy, but there are many others as well, is that they are too close to political power. They are people who don't take their profession seriously.
It's an interesting question. So you have a question of historical fact. Did the Armenian genocide occur or did it not occur? Based upon preponderance of evidence from parties at the time, sending back cables during 1915, newspaper reports of journalists who are on the ground, from within archives collected by the Turkish state from eyewitnesses and so on.
First of all, there were very important politicians in the Ottoman Empire who, even before the First World War, spoke on their desire to transform this multi-ethnic empire into a homogeneous, Turkish-speaking Islamic nation.
They call them Young Turks. They want the unity among all Turkic states, starting from Ottoman Empire all the way to Central Asia, without those minorities like Armenians, who were not Turkish. Armenians were more educated than the population at large. They were more into business, bankers, lawyers, doctors. So there was a tremendous resentment that this small minority is dominating various sectors of the economy and society.
One can trace, as a genocide scholar, how it begins with government programs to dehumanize Armenians, to treat them as subhuman, to blame them, very much as the Nazis treated the Jews. And there is quite a similarity between the two genocides.
At the beginning of the First World War, at some point there were decisions being made by the leading Young Turks to get rid of the Armenian civilian population. Talat Pasha was the interior minister, and later he became the Grand Vizier. And as such, he's the arch perpetrator of the Armenian genocide. On the 24th of April 1915, arrests and mass executions began of Armenian economic, religious, political, and intellectual elites.
The first step in every genocide, they kill off the people who could lead the opposition.
When I was doing research in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul, I stumbled upon one important document. It was dated 23rd of May, 1915, and it was a very simple order to all provinces in the Ottoman Empire to commence the deportation of Armenian civilians in those provinces.
The men were generally shot if they were over 12. The women, children, and old men were, quote, relocated, forcibly marching women and children to death.
Հրացաները թիրքենի դավայ ասեմեն ու հրացաներով ծերով ֆեդերով հրացանի գոտերով խփում էին չարաչար հոգի էին անում չարաչար պլետով մոդաբանով խփում էին ծերով դուրում մտնում են շարքի մեջ դուրում են բայց որ կոշկով դենաս էլի They were
deported to Deir Zor. Deir Zor was a desert in which very little grew. Anybody who was deported in the summer of 1915 in this climate has a very low chance of surviving a march of more than 20 kilometers. Some Armenians lived 1,500 kilometers from the final destination. More than 90% of Armenians were killed during the deportations. Now, how do we know this? Because Talat Pasha kept very meticulous records of the deportations. He kept these records in a black book. Talat Pasha's widow handed over this black book to the Turkish journalist Murat Bardakçı in the 1980s, and he kept it for a long time, and he published it. So this is a source that traces back directly to the organizer of the genocide. In the summer of 1915, the genocide gains momentum. As the deportations turn into massacres, massacres then turn into a genocide. Missionaries were stationed all over the empire, and there were eyewitnesses to the mass killing, and they wrote objective accounts of the massacres.
The men had been killed earlier. All women were gathered together in order to remove their clothes, and they were laid on top of each other, 2 by 2, and beheaded. The ones underneath were not all killed the first time, and the soldiers shouted, "Those of you who are alive, stand up, and you will be taken to Mezra." All who obeyed were killed.
Horas pametin, te moras mamana pet, and horo pezer go polo yet. Dus ninken en terink me dört me chente. Egan kasan karazi perana. Sabah popik teknik champen kanab. Arun uçura karnı belli diye. Yok usteler spamnım neyin. Taraf nerkan, men kucurmeyin. Can da gelir parazi.
My grandpa's sister, she couldn't have children. And she prayed so much to have children. She got pregnant and she had twin boys. And the massacre started. And they said, we need to run, we need to go. They're killing everybody, they're killing Armenians. And she couldn't move. I mean, she just delivered. They never made it. They got killed by Turks.
Turkey goes around saying, oh, this wasn't as bad as the Holocaust. There were no gas ovens, so it wasn't genocide. But of course, this didn't have gas ovens, but it had the most brutal forms of killing.
Ye pratket tanumen. Sirunasrinerin mortumen enka mortum kısmen ye pratkede.
It was well known what was happening. The New York Times, I think, had at least 140 stories, many of them front page stories. Many other newspapers all over the world reported on this. Henry Morgenthau was the ambassador of the United States to the Ottoman Empire during the Armenian Genocide. What he saw in his embassy in Constantinople was the destruction of an entire people. He made plenty of cables back to the U.S. government to describe what was happening. He was just ignored by the State Department.
If there's anything that we know about the perpetrator, the organizing perpetrator of the Armenian Genocide, Talat Pasha, it's because Morgenthau had contact with him. He used to visit him in his office, sometimes even in his house.
One day, Talat Pasha made what was perhaps the most astonishing request I'd ever heard. Talat said, I wish that you would get the American life insurance companies to send us a complete list of their Armenian policyholders. They're practically all dead now and have left no heirs to collect the money. It, of course, all should go to the state. I lost my temper and walked out.
I lost a lot of people. Every day I go to bed, I pray. I pray for justice. I want people to know the truth. They shall know the truth.
On the eve of the First World War, 2 million Armenians lived in the Ottoman Empire. By the end of the war, the majority were dead. At least 1.5 million were killed.
There is no doubt that over half the Armenian people were massacred or marched to death.
You can come to this by examining the evidence, which I have. There's overwhelming evidence to support that there was a serious Armenian genocide.
At the end of the First World War, Talat Pasha and a few others fled on a submarine to Russia. They then settled in Germany, and most of the practical organizers of the genocide continued to live in Turkey after the First World War, and many of them even achieved very high positions in the Turkish Republic. Can you imagine that a leading Nazi after 1945 would achieve very important and high positions in the German state?
Germany has come to terms with the Holocaust, in fact, has been an admirable example of accountability. Turkey, on the other hand, is the opposite extreme.
For example, Talat Pasha's grave is perched on a hilltop in Istanbul overlooking the Palace of Justice. There are many Talat Pasha streets, Talat Pasha neighborhoods, there are schools named after Talat Pasha, and this is unacceptable.
My grandparents marched into the Syrian desert, but all of their families were killed on the way. They met each other, married, and recreated a new family, and that's how I come that I exist. In fact, few Armenians lived through the death march, but one was a 14-year-old girl, Aurora Mardiganian. After she witnessed the death of her entire family, she was kidnapped and sold at the slavery markets of Anatolia. After 2 years, she escaped. She was helped by America's Near East Relief Organization and given a home in New York City. In 1918, Aurora was approached by a screenwriter, and 1 year later, a silent film was made based on her life, starring Aurora as herself. In one of the most famous scenes, 16 young Armenian girls are nailed to crosses by their Ottoman tormentors. Years later, Aurora confessed that the scene was inaccurate because the truth was more terrible than Hollywood was willing to show. The Turks had made much smaller, pointed crosses, and after raping them, forced the girls to sit on the pointed cross through the vagina until they were impaled to death. Every year, an award ceremony bearing Aurora's name honors those who risked their lives in order to save others around the world.
Tonight, we celebrate something much stronger than hate. We call them refugees, but they're people just like you and me. And if you stand right in front of them and you look them deep into their eyes, you might very well see a young Armenian girl named Aurora trying to get home.
They were calling and yelling, you're gonna die. There will be no one single Armenian to leave.
It happened to Armenians starting 101 years ago, and we've seen it repeated all over the world since. Germany, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda. I've seen it firsthand in the broken limbs and the broken families and the broken hearts of the people of Darfur. And so tonight we honor them. We honor the 1.5 million lives that were lost 101 years ago. And we honor those lives by calling their tragedy by its true name, genocide, the Armenian genocide. Hitler once famously said, "But who remembers Armenia?" The answer is the whole world. That's who.
my grandpa escaped the genocide, the rest of his family got killed. And my grandpa died very young, because if even you're physically alive, you're not 100% person. That's why I never met my grandpa. Now this is the closest I can get to that.
Շնորհակալություն, Վերինաստի ջան, ուրախ եմ, որ ծանոթացա։ Եվ պրակսիա տատիկ պիտի հարցնեի, թե դուք Ղարսի շրջանից եք, քանի որ մեծ հայրս ձեր գյուղից էր, կարող է իրար ճանաչում էիք, կարող է միասին երեխեքը միասին դուրս էիք գալիս, խաղում էիք։
Շնորհակալ եկացին Hamdbag.
Ապրեք, շատ գոհ եմ, շատ գոհ եմ։
Մավձիջան։ Այազիջան, ապրիկ։ Ամեն ինչ։
One and a half million Armenians is a lot of people. More than half of our population were wiped out. How can you deny? So many people missing, dying, so many stories, horrific stories, orphans, hundreds of thousands of orphans. Orphans came from where? They had parents, they had families. What happened to them?
It just hurts a lot. When I remember everything happened to me, to my dear ones, and to my people, it does hurt a lot.
I don't think there are words to explain that pain that we feel as people, and that is still not healed because it's being denied that it never happened.
So Armenian people have been running for generation after generation. So we are hereditary refugees. Less than half of the Armenians who were living in eastern Turkey before World War I escaped the slaughter of the Turks. Most of those who did, like my grandfather and grandmother, fled further east. It was really the only place they could escape. There were no cars then. They were lucky if they had a horse or donkey. Most just had to walk miles and miles, and most of them ended up in Armenian areas of what was to become the country of Azerbaijan. My grandfather, grandmother, for example, their family running from Van, they ended up in Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and that's where they lived, in Shushi.
If you fly across Karabakh in a helicopter, as I've done a couple of times, you understand why it's such a coveted bit of ground. I live in London. I work for the Carnegie Endowment, and I write about in this part of the world. You've got arid landscapes on either side, and then you've got this beautiful wooded highland landscape, which is Karabakh. You've also got these incredible medieval churches dotted over the landscape, some of them going back 10th, 12th century. So you have a territory called Karabakh, which has a large Armenian population, so Christians, and it's surrounded by Azerbaijanis who live down in the plains, who are Muslims.
My mom, she was born in Karabakh, and unfortunately it coincided with invasion of Karabakh by very large Azeri army. Many Armenians were killed at that time.
Right now we're sitting in Shushi, Nagorno-Karabakh. In 1920, there was a major massacre. 10 to 15,000 Armenians were killed. The rest were all chased out of the city.
Azeri or Azerbaijan, these are Turks. They just continued what Turkish army did starting with 1915. They were killing all Armenians. And this is why entire village escaped into Baku.
My grandfather and grandmother also fled to Baku. By 1921, Baku and all of the surrounding region became part of the Soviet Union. During Soviet era, things were very different. People believed that the government will always be there and they will always protect us.
When you have an empire controlling it, the Soviet Empire, Armenians and Azerbaijanis living side by side, more or less okay. There's a Russian policeman you can call who comes in and knocks heads together if there's a problem.
Baku, Azerbaijan, it was a very international city, all driven by oil riches. It was on the Caspian Sea with shipping to the world.
People would move to Baku to find a job, to provide for their families. So my father was one of them.
Russians, Armenians, Jews, Georgians, and many other nationalities living in capital of Azerbaijan.
But there was an underlying Azerbaijani persecution of Armenians that only the Soviet government kept from going out of control again. When I was growing up, when we would play, a word of like Armenian would come out as something that was a bad name that someone would call out.
We knew that we were second class.
Hatred toward Armenian community was cultivated for a really long period of time.
Azeris were Turks. They just had a different name, new name. We call the Soviet Union name. They just created a republic and they were Turks. We knew they hated us. It's a genocidal bond that connects these two countries even today.
Թուրքիայի եւ Ադրբեջանի ղեկավարները բարբերաբար հայտարարում են, որ իրենք մեկ ժողովուրդ են, բայց ապրում են տարբեր պետություններում։ Եվ բնականաբար այդ մեկ ժողովրդին էլ ներարկում են ուրացման գաղափարախոսություն։
Biz bir millet, iki devletik.
We are one nation with two states.
We lived every day knowing that the Azeri state we lived in was so closely connected to the Turkish government that massacred us in 1915. Basically, things were calm.
You've got Armenians and Azerbaijanis living side by side, and these two people are staring each other in the face. And that was the situation in the late 1980s when the Soviet Union came to fall apart.
By the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union, lots of Armenians had moved back to Nagorno-Karabakh. After all, it was their ancestral land with Armenian history that dates back centuries and centuries.
And that is when, in the late 1980s, when those people in Nagorno-Karabakh decided they certainly weren't Azeris, overwhelmingly 90% of them were, in fact, Christian Armenians.
Nagorno-Karabakh was one of the first regions to attempt to break away from the Soviet Union.
At that point, the demonstrations against Armenians in Azerbaijan were all over, and we saw them in Baku every day. The demonstrations got more and more violent, and finally they turned into mobs and massacres of Armenians.
Sumgait is on about 30 minutes of driving distance from Baku.
It was February 27, 1988. My God, you cannot imagine what's going on there. This is something horrible.
Оттуда вывели мужа, девера и заловку. Заловка была голая, и вот так они всех их вывели на улицу. И на улице стали их бить, как я сказала уже, ножами, топорами.
You've got lots of thuggish criminal young men, and they start going around the town looking for Armenians. The whole thing gets out of control, the police aren't there, and this horrible violence breaks out.
Мне было тогда 15 лет. Они ворвались в квартиру и стали кричать, что они пришли пить армянскую кровь.
You've got these gangs of young men looking for Armenians, beating them up, raping women, killing local Armenians, and no one intervenes.
Голоса слышны, как убивают, кричат.
Получал удары. В одно время я пришел в себя, но родителей я четко видел. Они были очень рядом. Близко рядом со мной лежали. Родителей нет.
У них были канистры с бензинами. Они были готовы к этой резне.
Живем, сожгли живем моего мужа, азербайджанские звери. Живем, сожгли.
Կենակրի վագանում։ Այն թորքերը խոսում են, բեսու ձայնը խոսում են։ Ահա երտուսեկեք, յուրաս լեզվով չխնրադոլուն։ Արմատուրերա որթեն, սպանեն, լող արմատուրով սպանա, քարով սպանա, պստալետ չլացեք կներին, լող այդ քարով սպանալետ, իրան։ Հա, երախեմին ես կողմ, աչ կողմ, մինի ձախ կողմ։ Տանից 2-3 մետր հրեի դա չմաշին։ Ոչ մի կնիկ չի տեսնա, ոչ մի ծնող չի տեսնա։ Ամեն ցավը կտմանավա, բայց երախին հերը չի տմանվա։ Դրանց հետո ընկացի մեքենա ճանապարհակա, մեքենի ճանապարհին դա ես է պարկում, դա որ կցինիզ է տակը սպանեն, ասեցին ձեզ սպանեի ավելի լավ կներ, չեմ ուժ ապրեմ դրանց հետո։
Сумгайт — это продолжение. Продолжение того самого 15-го года.
Это, я думаю, это было продолжение великого геноцида 15-го года.
The fact that whatever happened in 1988 was continuation of 1915, it is 100%. And the fact that if we don't do anything about this, it will happen again.
And it did.
This happened in Baku.
The street, which is very wide, is just jammed with people and they're walking towards Armenian village. My mom started screaming. She's so scared.
There was a garden right too close to our university, and I saw 2 people being there killed. I saw this with my own eyes. Yes, I did.
My grandfather and I, we were, watching outside the window. We were watching this man was passing by, and he was beaten by young people. He was really old, so they kept beating him, and he kept walking, and they just beat him. Yeah. I couldn't watch. I was telling Grandpa, can we call the police? And, he tried and nobody would come.
We are waiting for this train to come back, and we saw a horrible picture. We saw 10 young Azeris. I even counted them. And in the middle of their crowd, it was very, very, very elderly Armenian woman, barefoot. It was actually January. It was very cold time. And in one hand, she had a teapot. When I saw how they were beating her and kicking her, and when I saw her barefoot with this teapot in her hands, I started crying. I could not hold this anymore. My mind, I think, oh my God, these people they're not humans. Even animals probably would not do this kind of thing. They were beating her. Her face was all in bruises. I would remember this probably until I died. This is what I saw on this station with my own eyes.
Я тоже работала косметологом. Я даже 3 раза занимала первое место. Получила звание мастер золотые руки. К 6 часов. В это время в мою дверь стали стучаться. Открой. И я стала говорить на азербайджанском, что а что случилось? Он говорит, открой, здесь армяне живут. 2 были, они ворвались и говорят, что у тебя здесь 2 дочки, мы должны ее на глазах у тебя изнасиловать. Они мне говорят, и моих дочек нету, они не здесь. Маме вот такой длинный нож подставили к горлу. И на глазах у моей мамы надо мной надругались 2 негодяя. Представляете мое положение, что со мной было? Я думала, я с ума сойду. Я думала, что скорее весит. Моя мама стояла как полотно белое. И мне сказали, когда они это все делали, они мне сказали, там толпа издевается над твоими дочками.
All Armenians who survived the killings had to flee Azerbaijan, leaving everything they owned behind, everything they worked all their lives for Azeris to take over, basically steal. Less than 14 years after I was born in Baku, I was experiencing the same genocide that my grandfather escaped twice. And I was running away just like he did. I was lucky enough to get on a train. I was so lucky that we were able to escape, from Baku, and, we're able to go on now. And there were a lot of people who didn't.
The Armenians of Baku had been there for centuries. Many of them had built the city, they'd built the oil industry, and suddenly they were being thrown out of their own cities.
We were all scattered, but we were considered to be the lucky ones. But that's not really very lucky when you end up alone because somebody wanted to kill you, somebody doesn't like you.
Around the same time, on the other side of Azerbaijan, inside and around Karabakh, the Armenian independence movement moved a bit faster. So there was a feeling in Moscow that we've got to punish those Armenians who want to break away from the Soviet Union. And in 1991, there was this kind of joint Azerbaijani-Russian operation to move whole villages full of Armenian civilians, displace them, and to move in Azerbaijanis.
Azerbaijan had begun its Operation Ring, torturing, raping, driving people off their land with nothing. My name is Caroline Cox. I'm a nurse and a social scientist. I was asked to lead an international delegation to investigate, and it was perfectly obvious that the Armenians were not the aggressors, that Azerbaijan was carrying out an attempted genocide. It fits every criterion of genocide.
Երեխեք թալան անելու են կողոպտելու ժողովուրդը մտան, դեսին թալան անել, կողոպտել, տեսել, ճարտել, տանել, բերել հետ ձևի բռնաբարության շատ տեղեր, հարսերի, երեխաների։
Դեղես մեզ տարան Կիրաբադի բերդը, օրեկան 10-20 անգամ, ցերեկը մտնում են ջարդ փշորանում, բուրուպավոյ։ Քացով, Ես Պոշկիներից ենքան են տվել, որ տելիս, եսա որ տելիս կբացեմ կնայես։ Այստեղս վերքաբացված չի էլ փակում, մեզ քանի տարի է, 30 տարի է։ Չեմ էլ ուզում միա պատկերացնեմ այդ մոմենտը, աշկիս աղաչի բերեմ։ Հետո դուբիկո ցոբանու սեսկոլոգավոր մեզ կաղնացրին 28 հոգի ենք, մեզ հայերից 28 հոգի հանել են։ Մեզ համարել բերելին մի 12-15 հոգի պարապած տղեքի, սաղդ պարապածները, խոփովեն հաճույքի համար։
And then with 1991, 1992, with the end of the Soviet Union, Moscow is pulling out of the region. But what Moscow is leaving behind is lots and lots of weapons, and you start to see what we might call a full-scale war.
Of course, the Armenians were not expecting to have to fight, so they had hunting rifles against tanks. It was David against Goliath. It was 250,000 people against 7 million strong Azerbaijan.
By this time, I was in the United States, but my sister was living right in the middle of it, in Stepanakert. I didn't know if she was dead or alive.
We went to the villages where Azerbaijan had attacked and people had been just slaughtered. I went up to a village of Marahar, and Azerbaijan had attacked that village.
Ապրիլի 10-ին 88 թիվին այդ թուրքերը մտան գյուղը, սպանեցին, մեկ սպանեցին, մեր գյուղացի շատն էլ սպանեցին, և իմ ամուսինը, իմ մամաս, պապաս սպանեցին տեց, մամայս պուլյան թխել էր, սես տեղեցա մտել, պարկեց հետ տեղը։
I mean, these were real war crimes which Azerbaijan should be called to account. They sawed off the heads of some of the civilians, villagers who lived there. I saw the saws, I saw the decapitated bodies.
How is that possible? Well, it's possible if you perpetuate the idea that your enemies are less than human, because then you're not killing a fellow human being. In the case of the Ottomans and the Turks, they felt the Armenians were somehow not human and therefore could be exterminated as a race. And so you have that kind of historic prejudice inculcated in people in Azerbaijan.
Battalion edike. Kengane Bernabarumen, yevi yerku sedirne kederim.
Finally, in May 1994, I saw on TV that a ceasefire had been signed. Armenians in the US were crying.
It was tremendous courage and faith and determination which enabled the Armenians of Karabakh even to survive that war, let alone in the end to win it.
This is such an important church to all Armenians, but it was horrible. When the war was going on, it was occupied by Azerbaijan, and they shot rockets from it down on the city of Stepanakert, where my sister lived. And she was lucky. She and her family survived, but so many people have died. And now I come here as an American and Armenian to raise my voice because there's another tragedy happening. Azerbaijan is still attacking us. Even the airport is not safe.
There is a beautiful airport there, modern little airport, and you can't fly in.
В 2010 году строительство было полностью закончено, а самое последнее навигационное оборудование.
Azerbaijan has threatened to shoot down any plane that lands, whether it's full of passengers or not. That brutal threat, it keeps the airport absolutely idle.
Был случай, когда хоть один самолет вылетел отсюда после вот того, как его восстановили по образцу старому?
Нет, таких случаев не было.
Nobody can imagine that in the 21st century, a state leader may say that we are going to shut down a plane, civil plane, and this was announced by the president of Azerbaijan.
Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijani land, remains Azerbaijani land, and Azerbaijan will recover its sovereignty over Nagorno-Karabakh.
Azerbaijan, for the last 23 years, has been basically governed by father and son. And the kind of ironic thing is that the son, who is younger, who speaks English, who's worked in business, is actually turned out to be more authoritarian than the father.
One might naively think that, well, Azerbaijan is in the broader European area, might hope one day to become a member of the EU. Shouldn't there be a lot more scrutiny on the human rights situation? And the answer is no, not really.
There is a lot of religious oppression in Azerbaijan as well as violations of human rights. It's not a human rights record to be proud of at all.
The human rights situation in Azerbaijan is one of the worst, if not the worst, in the broader European area.
I am 60 years old. They tormented me for the past 2 days because I have written that there are political prisoners in Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan's been locking up a lot of the pro-Western figures, journalists, lawyers, human rights workers.
What do you think about those who say that you run your country like a post-Soviet dictatorship?
These kind of expressions, they are insulting to us. Sometimes we become a subject for very unjustified and very biased critical attacks. In international media, in so-called international human rights group, these attempts always to present Azerbaijan as undemocratic are absolutely unacceptable.
Why is Azerbaijan in the state that it's in? The critical element is oil, because Azerbaijan has so much wealth from the oil that it controls. And so it's able to buy people off. A variety of oil companies in the West who hope to invest or do have investments, but also the money that is made from that oil has to be stored somewhere. And that's mainly in banks in London, in Switzerland, and in the United States.
I have the close kinship with many of the sponsors. I tried to, I think, ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, BP. Let me also thank SOCAR. I am a member of the Azerbaijan Caucus, enthusiastic member and supportive member.
We just wanted to ask you if you support Turkey in denying that the Armenian genocide happened.
I'm sorry.
We wanted to know, do they pay you money? Does Turkey pay you money? Have they paid for you to go on an all-expenses paid trip to Azerbaijan?
In Nagorno-Karabakh, which is now about 150,000 people, 97% or so of that region is Armenian. And so you have an ethnic group which is different to the surrounding Azeri region.
It is an element of Turkish strategy that Nagorno-Karabakh should go back to Azerbaijan.
Armenians, let go of Karabakh, withdraw.
It's quite crazy. I mean, if you're a Christian Armenian in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they all are 100% now, why would you ever want to agree to be dominated by Azerbaijan?
This is the house where my grandfather and father were born. My family lived in this village for centuries, and Armenians lived in Nagorno-Karabakh for thousands of years. We love this land, and we will never give it up.
when Azerbaijan says that Karabakh is their land. These churches were built in 12th century. And we know how old is Azerbaijan.
Մենք այստեղ ապրում ենք մոտ 5000 տարի եւ մենք ունենք բավականին մարդկության համար հեղինակություններ հանդիսացող աղբյուրներ։ Իդեմս Ադրբեջանի մենք ունենք մի երկիր, որը հայտնվել է աշխարհում 20-րդ դարի սկզբին եւ որակվել է իբր Խորհրդային Միության հանրապետություններից մեկը։
Azerbaijan behaves very constructively. For more than 20 years, we are committed to negotiation process. But everybody should understand, including Armenians, that this process cannot last forever. Sooner or later, something may happen.
This is a very dangerous situation along the line of contact between Artsakh and Azerbaijan. While many Americans may view this as a faraway, low-intensity conflict that has little relevance to their lives, that could change overnight. That could spark a local war and then a regional war and then a struggle between two major powers. So this could easily spiral out of control.
Այսօր մենք տեսնում ենք Ադրբեջանի կողմից այդ հարձակողական տրամադրությունները եւ այսօր էլ մենք ցավով ականատես ենք դառնում անմեղ անձերի, անմեղ հայրենիների սպանության.
I pray every day for Nagorno-Karabakh, really pray. I know we don't have money. I know we don't have oil. I just pray for miracle. You cannot just kill people because you hate them, because they're not your religion. It's just only miracle will help us.
Almost every day, snipers are killing villagers along the border.
Ադրբեջանի սահմանների մոտ գրեթե ամեն օր ավելի շատ քաղաքացիական զոհեր կան։ Այսօր 3 երեխաների հայր է զոհվել դիպուկահարի կողմից։
Այս հետոն նստած տեսա թափվեց։ Այնքան ալել, ոչխացնում են փոսում նստել, գրակոց կտրան օրեկալ են դուրս։
Այն կարգի երկրակոծները, որ մի կերպ ավտոն քաշեց այն անկյունը, ցեզ մաղում են։
Աշխատել ժամանակ գոմախտի տանամ, որ հողամասում ցերեզ Trumping խփեց սնայպերի, ոչ կմա։
The reason why you have these continued killings is there has been no accountability for the Armenian genocide. There's a direct parallel because the Azeri Turks identify with the Ottoman Turks, and indeed Turkey supports the Azeri Turks.
Well, words have a power to them, and it's part of the reason why the Turks have so strongly resisted use of the word genocide. It is meant to be stigmatizing.
It was in early 2005. I was invited to make a speaking tour in the United States of areas heavily populated by Armenian Americans. Basically, what I said is, I believe what happened in 1915 was indeed a genocide. But what happened was that my term of service in Armenia was shortened by a year. The United States government decided some time ago that it was not going to use this word genocide.
If Turkey is to have the assistance it needs, we must take immediate and resolute action.
Ike arrives in Muslim Turkey. He's greeted by Turkey's President Celal Bayar and Premier Menderes.
Mr. President, I want to thank you for your friendship, for your commitment to our alliance, and I want to once again reaffirm my personal strong support.
I think Turkey sets a fantastic example for nations around the world to see where it's possible to have a democracy coexist with a great religion like Islam.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Germany recognizes the genocide. France recognizes the genocide.
Célébrer le centenaire du génocide arménien était pour la France un devoir. Et je viens dire à mes amis arméniens que nous n'oublierons jamais les tragédies que votre peuple a traversées.
Britain and America, they're holding out. Now, it's very difficult because the evidence is something that can't be denied.
We now have one of the most important pieces of evidence that it was genocide.
What was missing in our field were mainly what we call it killings order or smoking guns. I found documents which were killings orders or related to coordination of the killing of Armenians during the 1915-17 periods. And these killing orders were written on Ottoman letterhead, original Ottoman documents, and the coding system which was used in these documents are the same that we have in Ottoman archives today. So this is a major blow to Turkish denialism.
I think we have to get to the point where we feel that we do have a moral obligation to use the word genocide.
I think it's a great help to have celebrities putting it on the TV screens of the world so people are aware.
But there was a genocide 100 years ago. They're right about that. And, they're pissed off. I don't blame them that the United States will not use the word genocide because we're friends with Turkey, who did it. And sorry, we're not going to upset Turkey. But you know who said it's a genocide? The Pope. Pope was like, yeah, it's a genocide.
Considerata come il primo genocidio del XX secolo. Essa ha colpito il vostro popolo armeno.
I am condemning and warning the Honorable Pope in the hope that he doesn't make such a mistake again.
Thousands of Armenian Americans marched through the streets of LA. The crowd demanding the U.S. and Turkish governments recognize as genocide the killings of 1.5 million Armenians under the Ottoman Empire a century ago.
Our women were raped, our children were killed.
The United States doesn't want to recognize, so we're here every year.
In Washington today, the highly anticipated meeting between President Donald Trump and the President of Turkey, Recep Erdogan.
You could call it a bodyguard riot. Security men guarding Turkey's President Erdogan, kicking and pummeling protesters outside the Turkish embassy Tuesday in one of Washington's fanciest neighborhoods. 11 people injured, 2 seriously.
Who attacked you?
The Turks. The Turks attacked me. The Turks attacked me.
Police briefly detained the assailants, but released them after learning they held diplomatic immunity. Video from the scene shows Turkish President Erdogan looking during the assault.
There is a simple rule. If you don't acknowledge a historic wrong that you committed in the past, this means there is a potentiality that you can repeat these. That is why it is essential for Turkey and the United States to acknowledge the Armenian genocide, and they should stop to support Turkey's bullying policy in denying the Armenian genocide.
And despite all the protests, all the history, all the Oscar-winning movies, all these books that have written, yet today we are still doing the same thing.
As I said when I had the great honor of addressing the Turkish parliament in Ankara, I am strongly committed to creating the best possible relationship between Turkey and the United States.
Regarding the atrocities that happened in the beginning of the 20th century that some would label the Armenian genocide, I'm wondering why it is that we do not recognize it as such.
I think it's fair to say that this has always been viewed, and I think properly so, as a matter of historical debate and conclusions rather than political.
It is a great pleasure to welcome President Erdogan for his first visit to the White House in years. The American
You know, the deals that were made between Turkey and the United States and all of these other countries not to call it genocide, to me, are shameful.
There are millions and millions of dollars being spent by people to urge the U.S. Congress to ignore its duty.
Do you condemn the recent atrocities of Azeri soldiers against Armenian soldiers in the Nagorno-Karabakh?
I don't support any atrocities, no matter where they're located, no matter when they happen.
Do you deny that the Armenian genocide happened?
I do deny that.
The United States sees Turkey as one of the most important countries in the world geostrategically. You can see that nakedly from our cable release. The greatest number of cables is from Ankara because of the central place that Turkey plays within the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. It is the point that connects all these other points.
The best way to characterize the political climate in Turkey would be dictatorship, censorship.
Europe and the United States, in acceding to Turkey's demands to not recognize the Armenian genocide, has emboldened it in other forms of human rights suppression.
And the world doesn't get to hear about it. Basically, zero tolerance for any real reporting for journalists. And even if they do, when they come back to countries such as our nation, the United States, they get pressure directly from the State Department, from the White House, not to run stories on any kind of atrocities that are being committed in Turkey.
This problem was not going to be solved by votes in parliaments of other countries. It has to be solved in Turkey. The same is true of the continuing denial of the Armenian genocide. It's the Turkish treatment of this issue that is most important. It's important not only for Armenians, but it's important for Turks themselves.
I think that the people of Turkey are also victims of the denial. You know, you have a lot of Turkish families that find out at their grandmother's bedside that their grandmothers were actually Armenians. And they were hidden orphans or converted Armenian women. So the denial is also a disservice to them.
The Armenian genocide is like a terrible family secret that the Turks don't want to face. They're decent enough to be troubled by it.
That has meant that there have been calls for the recognition of the Armenian genocide within Turkey for many years. But the new conformity that is happening under Erdogan is making a situation where it's now extremely hard to fight for those rights.
Bana göre Türkiye devleti geçmişiyle yüzleşirse aslında en doğru şeyi yapar. Bunun için yaptığımız bir soykırım anıtı var Diyarbakır'da.
I think the act of the mayor of Diyarbakir of erecting a monument to the Armenian genocide was an act of great courage. Of course, it ended him up in prison.
Bunun için Türk devleti beni görevden attı, meclisi feshetti ve bizi yargılamaya başladı. Defalarca çalışmalarım engellenmeye çalıştı. Ayrıca 3 defa suikastten kurtuldum. Ve aynı zamanda benim için hapis cezaları isteniyor.
Turkey today has intellectuals who do recognize that there was a genocide. And it's the state in Ankara which is still digging in its heels. In Baku, it seems they've just bought the whole Turkish line, hook, line, and sinker. I very much regret that the Azerbaijanis have decided to take up the position of Turkey in denying the Armenian genocide.
Denial is the response of those people who would like to continue the destruction of a people.
Over the years, we see this happening in Azerbaijan. Those historic enmities, when they're not brought to light, when the facts are not brought to the surface, when people could continue to dehumanize others, can lead to the most unspeakable atrocities. And I'll give you a very graphic illustration. Several years ago, Azerbaijan and Armenia were engaged in a NATO Partnership for Peace exercise in Hungary. During that exercise, one of the Azeri soldiers walked into the room of an Armenian soldier, and while he slept, nearly decapitated him with a hatchet.
We meet Azeri officer, Ramil Safarov, asked, "Where are you from?" We said that we are Armenians. He said that it's okay, we are brothers. 5 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and somebody shouted, "Open the door, we will kill all Armenians." And after some time, somebody said to me, "Open the door, we are from police." Then I saw traces of blood in my door. Hungarian officer said me later that Ramil Safarov said him, "I don't kill you. I only want to kill Armenia." Then Safarov wanted to go and find my room.
He was arrested, he was sentenced and convicted in a Hungarian court, but later he was repatriated back to Azerbaijan, where he was released from custody. He was promoted in rank, he was given back pay and feted to a parade celebration in Baku.
So suddenly, this guy whose only claim to fame in the world was that he'd murdered an Armenian with an axe was actually being rewarded by people in Azerbaijan for what he'd done.
To applaud that when he is repatriated back home is merely to further indoctrinate people. We're looking at a situation right now in Azerbaijan where you have that kind of historic prejudice against the Armenians.
Могли бы вы жить по соседству с армянином?
Безобразно. Люди. Они всегда болтуны врут все время. Меня, клянусь.
They have continued to have that fundamental dehumanizing attitude towards Armenians.
And it needs to be called out for what it is. When you perpetuate those ideas of the past, that the Armenians are somehow not human, then you make it possible for other vicious crimes to take place in the future.
Karabakh, I think, is at the moment the neglected genocide and something which needs to be taken seriously by the international community, because if Azerbaijan decides to carry out its very belligerent threats, they will probably destroy people of Karabakh.
I think if Azerbaijan ever gets its hands on Nagorno-Karabakh, ethnic cleansing there will be.
I actually raised that issue on the floor of the House of the Lords, and I said, I'm not naive, I can understand commercial interest, I can understand strategic interest, but I don't think the majority of British people would want oil at the price of cluster bombs on children.
Azerbaijan's a really serious situation. And ever since the mid-2000s, when Azerbaijan struck oil in a big way and started exporting it to the West, their budgets have increased massively. They now have a military budget of about $3 or $4 billion a year, which they've been using to buy weapons.
What we saw in the early 90s was primarily a ground war. A war today would be far more dangerous.
You've got artillery, you've got all sorts of heavy weaponry now.
And it would be an air war, which it was not in the early 90s.
You've got these attack aircraft, you've got drones.
More dangerous, not only to the participants, but to the whole region.
No one can predict how a war will go.
This is one of the most heavily armed borders in the world. There would be civilian targets that would be hit.
Russia and Turkey might be drawn in.
Then you think of the Metsamor nuclear power plant, which could be targeted. You think of the pipelines coming out of the Caspian. This is a recipe for a full-scale disaster of epic proportions.
And obviously the danger is that one day Azerbaijan will pull the trigger.
Azerbaijan says Nagorno-Karabakh is theirs. At any time, Azerbaijanis can come here with tanks and rockets and kill everyone. I've come to Nagorno-Karabakh now to speak out because very soon the presidents of both Azerbaijan and Turkey will be meeting in the United States for a special meeting. As an American, I can't believe that the United States is supporting these two countries that have done so much harm to innocent people. We organized a vigil right here at this church. People are coming from all over Armenia to draw attention to this life and death issue and ask, why? Why
is it that these people, the Americans and the British, who we want to like, why is it that they in particular are joining with Turkey and Azerbaijan?
The answer is denial.
Until we refuse to go along with denials, we will be complicit to continuing genocide.
When I was asked the question once about why I still was working on genocide 35 years after I started, I thought about it really carefully. And I finally said, justice is more powerful than genocide.
Nagorno-Karabakh is not recognized by Azerbaijan. They say it's theirs. In fact, it's not recognized by any country. It's not on any map, but we exist. We exist.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
The situation in the region has been tense for decades, but this weekend's outbreak and violence is the worst in more than 20 years.
Azerbaijan launched artillery strikes at peaceful settlements.
This is where the Azeri terrorists came. They went to the first house where they killed 2 men and 1 elderly woman, 95-year-old woman. Later, they came here and killed driver of the truck, who was shot. Then he tried to run away. They catch up with him and they cut off his head while he was alive.
Ha, Belera, Halapian, Valerik, Halapian, Marvus, Halapian, Azmel. Ayo, sekarang müşinak kan biraz kokutken.
Ապրում եք ստեղ։ Դրանից չեք վախեցել մեկաթուրքից։
Ոչ մտա, ես ինչ լելա հերմլաստեմին, տրակուցալա, ինչ լա հերմտա։ Թուրքիան զուար İran հողամաս յուրան, ինչ պիտանի։ Մենք özümün xaoçunu, hacıqçunu, es hocuq körpə qoy kəsə abri. Mümkün bir abri. Eta.
It's like they were doing in Turkey in 1915. They were cutting Armenians' heads off. And now the Azeri Turks are doing the same thing. I wish I could scream so that the world can hear me. It really hurts to see innocent people die, cry, suffer. If every person would just say, enough is enough. We can't change the world and finally stop the genocide forever.
To deny that the Armenian genocide occurred, even though every genocide scholar on the planet has voted unanimously to designate it as a genocide. Well, that says to governments all over the world it is safe to commit genocide. It's just the same as other crime. If a criminal thinks he can get away with it, he'll try it again. And we've seen it again and again. Genocide Watch has counted well over 50 genocides since the Genocide Convention was passed by the United Nations in 1948.
I was not involved in anything at all.
Obviously, some people got killed.
I defended my country.
We wanted to build Cambodia into a clean and independent society.
Now what I want to do is give something back to the world and to Armenia. I want to say that genocide has to stop. My music is my voice. That's how I speak. So today I'm going to go to the Armenian Genocide Memorial. It's a sacred place for us. I want to make my statement musically there. Words cannot describe what I feel right now. I don't know what to say. It's just the feelings are too strong. So I think I'll just let my music talk for me. That's what I do best. So.
Representative Bordalo, is that you? Yes, hello. I just have a question about a committee that you sit on. Do you believe that the Armenian genocide happened in 1915?
We're not talking about that going on here.
Is that a yes or a no? No comment? Thank you.
I just want to ask you, do you believe there was an Armenian genocide in 1915?
I don't want to get into that. Thank you.
Do you think Armenians are still persecuted against today?
Congressman Wilson?
Yes.
Yes, this is about a committee you sit on. Do you believe that the Armenian genocide happened in 1915?
I'm on my way to committee now. Thank you.
Is that a yes or a no answer?
On my way to committee now.
No answer? Okay. Do you believe that the Armenian genocide happened in 1915? Yes or no? Do you have a comment on that? No? Congresswoman Fox?
Hello.
Hello. This is about a committee that you sit on. I'm wondering, do you believe that the Armenian genocide happened in 1915? Is that a yes or a no? Do you believe that they're still discriminated against to this day? That should be a pretty easy answer, no?
How are you? It's a pretty outfit. How many tours?
Congresswoman, what about the violence in the Nagorno-Karabakh region?